What is up, Brad fans? How you doing? So glad you're back for this episode. And the intro is going to be short because this guest needs very little introduction. I am speaking today with Jay Ingram, renowned science communicator. If you grew up in Canada in the 90s, 2000s, when I did, you will know Jay if you had any interest in science, either from Quirks and Quarks, the CBC radio show, or his hosting of Daily Planet, one of the first, if not the first, daily science news show that ran on Discovery Channel. Jay has also written several books. He appears in live speaking events. He is part of Beakerhead, a science festival that is run in Calgary, my hometown. And Jay also has a podcast, Anthropomania, which he hosts with Nikki Wilson, another great writer and science communicator, which explores the weird and interesting ways humans interact with animals. You can find Anthropomania anywhere you get podcasts. Just give it a search. Look in the show notes. We'll have a link for it there. Season 2 wrapped up just a couple weeks ago, and I spoke with Jay right before the release of the last episode, so our conversation's a couple weeks old, and we talked about the themes of many of the episodes of this season. Trash animals, how our lifestyle, how our waste is influencing different animals. We talked about de-extinction. Will it work? Does it work? What's the point? We talked about wildlife documentaries. Who are they good for? What are they good for? And we talked about the insect apocalypse, the decline of bugs all around the world. What does this mean for us? Hint, hint, it's not good. We weaved through many of these topics, bringing things together when we could, and I just really love talking to Jay. It's always such a good time to speak with him, so I wanted to thank him once again for coming on the show, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. But first, as always, please head on over to the website, twobradforyou.wordpress.com. There you can find ways to follow the show on any podcast app. Just look for Two Brad for You on any podcast app, and you will also be able to follow the show that way. Rate, subscribe, give us a comment. All that stuff really, really helps. And then, yes, website, twobradforyou.wordpress.com. You can find the many different ways you can get in touch with us. Social media at twobradforyou. Email, twobradforyou@gmail.com. And there's a link to a voicemail page on the website, twobradforyou.wordpress.com. Leave us a message. I love hearing from you all. I love getting the messages, getting the emails, and when appropriate, I will address your topics on the show and play your voice messages. Thank you so much, everyone, for reaching out, for listening, for following, for subscribing, rating, all of those things. And now, my conversation with Jay Ingram. All right, Jay. Hey, thanks for being here. I think this is like the third or fourth time you've joined me for the podcast. So you are now you were competing with John Gilliard for the most frequent guest. I think you've got it now. So thank you for being here
Yeah,
again.
well, I'll make sure I notify John about that. I
I
think
just spoke to him.
this is my annual visit.
Yeah, that's right. And coincidentally, Anthropomania Season 2 has released, what was it, a couple weeks ago now. So you're right in the thick of it.
Yep, we as we talk right now, um, on the 16th of May, we've dropped 5 of 6 episodes, and next Tuesday will be our sixth on fungi. And
Nice.
it's been an interesting season from a couple of points of view. One is that the diversity of topics. I mean, I don't know if it's different from season one, but we did everything this year from taking a close look at wildlife documentary making, and does it actually do the wildlife any good? Or what are we in this business for anyway? Self gratification, or an honest effort to highlight the importance of conservation, or what?
Mm-hmm.
There's of course an interesting history going back to Jacques Cousteau and Marlin Perkins' uh, ongoing long-running series in the 50s and I think early 60s. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, it was
Mm-hmm.
called, and even Disney. You know, uh, one of the first nature films of any kind I watched was something called Nature's Half Acre. It actually won an Oscar in the early 50s, and it was just like a 32-minute you can see it on YouTube. It's worth
Hmm.
a shot for anyone who's interested in the gigantically expensive and luscious David Attenborough BBC shows. But this was a pretty interesting attempt, and Walt Disney himself apparently was a real animal lover and was a big supporter. So they did their True Life Adventures series, and Nature's Half Acre was one. Anyway, that was only one. We did one on chickens because in North America, at least, there's a boom in backyard chickens. Although
Mm-hmm.
there's an avian flu issue right now in North America, associated mostly with migrating birds flying northward, interacting with chickens, geese, whatever barnyard birds. So that's been a bit of a crisis. More than 1 million birds have been slaughtered in just the province of Alberta, where I live now. But, you know, chickens, like, they have a pretty intriguing, amazing history going back a few millennia. And I mean, I won't go into the whole thing. I encourage people to listen to
Got to listen to the
Anthropomania.
show.
But the idea that when they were first, when we first, oh, and I should just say parenthetically that Anthropomania is really always focused on the peculiar nature of our human interaction and thoughts about wildlife. So we humans first got involved in chickens uh, as cockfighting, and that was a huge deal,
Not
and it
eggs,
still is,
not eggs, not meat.
not no, that
The
was
first record
secondary.
of it is the fighting.
Yeah, yeah, and there are people who argue that even today, those roosters who are involved in cockfights have a better life than factory chickens because
I could
they're
see it. Yeah.
actually, they live a luxurious life for 2 years until they're ready to fight. And if they lose the fight, well, they're dead. So they still had a good 2 years. Actually, it's not that great if they win the fight either, probably, because all that happens is they get to fight again and again until they die. So it's a peculiar, to me, super peculiar way of interacting with another species. On the factory broiler chicken side, the average size of a broiler chicken, at least in North America, and this is probably true of Europe too, is 4 times that it was in the 50s. And so you've had this enormous push to breed and feed and house chickens so that they just become, are they really living organisms anymore? They're basically a way of converting bird seed and food like that into protein for humans for a brief,
Yeah.
unfortunate time, because it's usually only months, usually only weeks, actually. They actually exist as, I put quotes around this, birds. 23 billion chickens in the world. It's the most populous bird, and it might be by mass the species with the biggest amount of biomass in the world.
Yeah.
So, chickens.
It's not. I mean, none of that is overly surprising. I think when you think about it and you look at if you've done any sort of reading on domestication of agriculture animals, as all these issues come in. But I mean, I would have put $1,000 on people who've been raising chickens from time immemorial or whatever like that, not fighting them. I definitely would have picked that would have come later. So it's interesting to go from, yeah, like whoever noticed, like, hey, we're fighting these birds. Why don't we eat them?
Yeah, I suspect that realization came sooner rather than later. I mean, the original,
When you got a bunch of dead birds piling
yeah,
up.
what are you going to do for them? You could put them in a landfill, and that was what we talked about in one of our episodes called trash animals.
Well, yeah, I actually have an anecdote I was going to run by you about that because here in Germany, one of the things I love about Germany is the amount of birds. They have a lot of wild birds, big birds, birds of prey. And I notice them more here than I do back home. We have lots of other great big wildlife in Canada, but I notice here birds, big eagles, hawks, things that I don't see on the regular back in Canada. And there's a few in my neighborhood even, and I'm convinced that it's the same ones every year. And I'm pretty sure it's not an eagle. It might be a
Yeah,
kite or something,
yeah,
one of these, but a big raptor, like a big bird of prey. I get great views of them from my balcony. I've been following these things year after year that I live here, and I finally got an amazing up close view of one of them when I was riding my bike. It was like soaring just like 10 feet above my head.
Really?
I could see the individual feathers, I could see the feet, the the claws, everything. It was amazing. And guess where I was riding next to?
Landfill.
That's right. It was at the landfill, and so I was overjoyed that I saw this bird and then immediately depressed, not just because of the smell, but like, oh, not you too, majestic bird. You have
Well,
so don't go
I
for the trash.
mean,
Don't go for the easy thing.
yeah, that's not surprising. And I mean, your reaction was an anthropomania reaction, right? Oh, too bad. Why is it too bad? They're
Yeah.
getting an easy meal. I mean, the thing that might be too bad is that we're changing them as a result. So I
Well,
suspect
yeah.
their microbiome, once you've been on a diet of landfill,
I was thinking disease, yeah,
yeah,
nutrition, like it
and then,
can't be good.
microbiome feeds into behavior usually in some sort of form if you wait long enough for that to become standard.
Hmm.
There's a good suspicion that urban coyotes, for people in Europe that aren't familiar with coyotes, they're like small scale wolves, but they are quite comfortable invading cities. Well, invading. We invaded them first, but now they're
Yeah, yeah.
you know giving it back to us. The kind of stuff that they eat is wrappers from fast food and stuff like that. And there's some tantalizing but not definitive evidence that because microbiomes do have an effect on behavior generally, and there are some bacterial species that, at least in dogs, are associated with higher aggression, that maybe some of the aggressive coyotes that have been a problem in some Canadian cities like Vancouver may be a
Hmm.
result of people either deliberately feeding them or inadvertently feeding them.
But do you think that goes as deep as the microbiome, or it's just a
Socialization.
I'm used to getting fed? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing. I
Well, it
don't know.
could. I mean, it could, but I think it could be the microbiome basis. I mean,
I mean, there's definitely a link, microbiome and behavior,
yeah,
like
yeah.
for
So,
sure,
I mean,
it's
yeah,
there.
I'm sure you're true. You're right that if you're actually feeding coyotes, they come to expect you to feed them like your dog would.
Yeah.
And so, but the most intriguing part of that was the famous Darwin's finches in the Galapagos. Now that there are some substantial towns in the Galapagos, a guy named Luis de Leon has done research on what they eat, and the finches in the city prefer chips, fries, stuff like that, and the
We're not so
and the
different, the birds and
yeah,
I.
and the finches in the countryside though won't touch it, won't touch that stuff. They'll eat the seeds
Hmm.
or whatever that they've evolved to eat. So, the question, which is unanswered so far, is whether they will evolve. I mean, they're famous for evolving bills that suit the diet that they adapt to. Well, maybe
Right.
that's going to happen, but driven by us.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a crazy kind of season. We we just the latest one that's available is on de-extinction, which I've come to think is it's very appealing to think about. You know,
Okay. This was what question I had on you. Are you for or against? And then like, what do you want to bring back? Let's. I want to know.
well, I mean that's I asked my co-host Nikki Wilson what she wanted to bring back, and of course she came up with something that no one's talked about: the Arctic camel, because camels evolved in North America first, and
Okay.
there was
There you
a
go.
huge camel in the Yukon territory up north. She'd like to bring that back, but I think that was, well, she spent time in the Yukon, so she's fond of the ancient camel. But they lived about 1 million years ago, so this whole idea, the most popular idea is bring back the woolly mammoth
Right.
because
That's the one you hear
you
about. Yeah.
you can and you can you have people have been able to reconstruct pretty much all their genome just from those dead ones that melt out of the ice as the ice melts and they
Yeah. And the
move.
permafrost and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
so you can get a genome. But I mean, if you ask me whether I'm for it or against it, I can't deny that the idea of traveling to the north and seeing a herd of woolly mammoths would be a pretty amazing experience. But getting there, I just don't think it's I don't think it's ever going to happen. And in fact, George Church at MIT, who's leading the Mammoth Project, when he talked to us, he said, well, we're not really calling it a mammoth anymore. We're calling it an Arctic elephant.
Hmm.
And so the
It's a hybrid.
justification, yeah, yeah, but maybe, yes, a hybrid, but maybe, 95%, well, 90% Indian elephant and maybe 6%, 7% mammoth. They've isolated about 40 some odd genes, the mammoth genes that they've succeeded, I think, in inserting into an Indian elephant genome. Things for an extra fat layer, shaggy fur, and so on, that sort of thing that would
Hmm.
enable them to. But see, here's the thing, it's not enough to do all this work and spend all this money so that you have an entertainment item for people. Hey, you
Yeah.
can come see the woolly mammoth. In fact, we're not even going to put them in the Arctic. We're going to put them in a zoo. I
Hmm.
mean, that's why else would Paris Hilton invest money in that project? I ask you. But so
Okay, that's
the
a little worrying.
scientists, yeah, the scientists involved use an ecological justification. So in the
Hmm.
north, in the days as the ice age was ending, there were a lot of large mammals grazing on what was much more of a grassy terrain, chewing up the ground so that the permafrost was exposed to cold air all the time and not, being able to melt as easily. A lot of arguments like this to say that we're bringing them back as a step to encourage biodiversity, but also maybe even fight climate change. Yeah, So, but what that ignores, and they're doing it for the passenger pigeon too. So the passenger pigeon, who's a little less known, nonetheless a spectacular bird, a beautiful bird, amazing fast flyer. But their main distinction is that there were somewhere between 3 and 5 billion of them in the mid 19th century. Uh,
Hmm.
so many, and they once they hatch their nestlings, the adults would be on the move, and they would fly in flocks that would last, if you stood in one place, would fly over you for 2 days continuously.
Oof.
No, no, they're really reliable records of that. John James Audubon, a famous artist who painted the birds of America in the early, well, 1830s and 40s, actually claimed that he traveled about 80 kilometers one day in the mid 1800s, probably, I guess, by stagecoach or something.
Hmm.
And the sky was full of passenger pigeons the whole time. So when they landed en masse to feed, and they liked things like acorns, chestnuts, and stuff like that, they would actually damage or even destroy patches of forest just by their weight, their mass, the amount of dung that they produced that would
I was going to say the
actually,
mess would be incredible.
apparently, like up to maybe half a meter thick pigeon shit. I mean, that's a lot. So of
You
course
think
you
of
kill
those
all the
caves
plants.
with bats, where they're all, you get a million bats that are doing like, but that's in
Yeah,
a cave. At least it's out of sight, out of mind.
yeah. No, this was, and of course, anyway, enthusiastic hunters just, you wouldn't even have to hunt. You just point your shotgun up in the air and you kill 12 with a
Yeah.
shot, and then gather them up, and they became a very popular food source. And somehow Americans managed to extinguish them completely in about 50 years, from
Yeah.
more than 3 billion to zero. Well, again, an ecological argument is being used here that that damage they did to those forests created succession forests. So they
Right.
destroy an area. The dung, after it killed everything, would then fertilize the soil, and then you'd get shrubs and then bushes and then trees, and so you'd
Similar to
maintain
the
a healthy
natural course
forest.
of fire, right?
Yeah,
Like it
exactly.
clears things out and you need that sort of destruction rebirth cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'll accept that, right? But how do you get there? The only reason they were able to do that is because there were millions and millions of them. And right now you're starting with zero passenger
Yeah.
pigeons. You have a good version of the passenger pigeon genome, but realizing it in the form of an actual bird is incredibly difficult. First of all, you have to find a dove, like the rock dove or the band-tailed pigeon, that is as close genetically to the passenger pigeon as you can get. But you have to get sperm and egg carrying passenger pigeon genomes. You have to somehow get that in the reproductive system of one of these modern day analogs. And then you got to hope that, okay, maybe most of them, uh, well, some would be sperm, some would be eggs, some would carry half the passenger pigeon genome and half the
Mm-hmm.
band-tailed pigeon genome. So, you might get, the first run, you might get a couple of embryos that are passenger pigeon, and then they hatch. Okay, and they're social birds. Unfortunately, the modern pigeon is not. So how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna make them? How are you gonna encourage them? Maybe it's all genetic, but I suspect it's behavioral too. And two doesn't get you anywhere, right? 10, no. 100, no. 1,000, 10,000, 10,000. If you could get 10,000,
Wait, you're saying two's not going to be enough? I'm pretty sure I read the Bible and they had two of every animal. And
and that is exactly the problem. That you got to go on accounts that are truthful. So, uh, okay, let's say you get 1,000. That's going to take decades,
mm-hmm.
decades minimum. So you
Yeah,
put them in an
of
aviary.
captive breeding.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
put them in an aviary, okay, in the northeast U.S. where they used to nest. But they're migratory, so you actually need to establish at least a second aviary somewhere to the northwest so that these birds, when they go through the reproductive cycle, will move to a different place because that's what they do. And if you're going to regenerate the forest, they have to do that. Well, how are
Right.
you going to do that? How are you going to encourage these birds that don't have a clue to go from one place to another?
Well, in
Somebody
all of
said,
any sort of landscape that, like, it's different. Like, the
yeah,
landscape
it
is
is
different. The
totally different.
forests are smaller. It's
Yeah.
urban. There's
The,
traffic.
the
There's,
temperature is different.
right.
Everything is different. The actually the I think it's the American chestnut's virtually extinct now. That was one of their favorite foods. But anyway, it comes down to this sort of angels on the head of a pin. How do we encourage them to migrate from the aviary one to aviary two? Well, maybe with drones. They'll follow drones. Well, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they just disperse, and then you're. Oh, I almost swore.
It's okay. You could
Then you're
swear on
just
the show.
screwed.
We don't have any rules.
Anyway, I just think it's so highly impractical as to be not worth the money that's being put into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's one of the big arguments against
Mm-hmm.
de-extinction. We have a lot of species that are going to go de-extinct or going to go extinct probably soon. Why don't we spend this money to prevent that
Mm-hmm.
happening and avoid this endless loop of technological innovation and decades of time to bring back something that we're not even really convinced is going to work? Let's put it into let's develop some of these reproductive technologies. Admittedly, that might be really good because there are a lot of rare birds that you could use this. It'd be like in vitro fertilization for
Mm-hmm.
birds, and you could supplement populations. But to bring back the passenger pigeon or the Carolina parakeet or the dodo, it's just romanticism, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
It's interesting because it's such a it almost it's like an analogy for so much of our other human problems and our use of technology to solve them, right? Like, it's like you have solutions arguably that would be more impactful for climate change, for example, of just like not driving as much, converting to electric vehicles or something like that. But yet there's still people that are like, no, 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 we'll just do everything the same way we're doing. We'll just build this giant thing to suck out all the carbon or something like this. And it's like, I don't know, it's just, yeah, that lack of foresight or that hubris of technology that's just like, oh, we'll just throw some technology at it and boom, we'll get these pigeons back and everything will be fine. It'll all work out and it'll be super cool and yay us, look at what we can do. It's kind of a hubris thing, I guess, you
Yeah,
know?
it is, and it's not limited to technology either. I mean, introducing the cane toad into Australia in the hopes that it would rebalance the ecology. You know, come on. I mean, I can't name them because I can't remember them all, but you could easily come up with 10 examples of
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, but then, our last episode, which is going to come out next Tuesday, is a look at fungi, but not as sort of, let's pile all the science on it. In fact, we have three guests. One is a guy who spent some time hunting morels and like a super competitive, actually somewhat dangerous. First guy they met when he and his buddies went up to pick morels in the Yukon was a guy with a shotgun and a pail. And he said, "Move along, this is my
Oh,
patch."
wow.
So, there's that. That's
Yeah.
anthropomania of the highest order. We talked to an artist who uses what she calls the quiet hunt, walking through a forest looking for fungi of any species. But she takes her art students with her to just to sort of sharpen their visual acuity, the ability to look at a chaotic landscape and sort of appreciate finding the things that you want to see when the things are so variable in and of
Hmm.
themselves. And so that was a nice, it's I think I've learned this season that the more sort of artistic or non-scientific points of view that we can bring into things, the better. And then we have another guy named Rob Dunn, who you might know, who's I think at University of North Carolina, who his attitude towards science is more of a kind of science of everyday life. So he's interested in how many things like how many fungal spores are you likely to inhale in a day? How many species of fungi might you find in your house? He's found more in this kind of citizen science approach. He's found 40,000 varieties of fungi, which is more than the number of fungi officially recognized as existing in the
Oh,
United
wow. So I
States.
was going to say these are like he's finding previously unidentified species.
Yeah, and probably well and are not well described. The artist told us that she went to buy a house in Toronto, or went to look at a house in Toronto, and in the basement there she found some cool little mushrooms growing around the base of the toilet in the downstairs bathroom.
It's kind of where you'd expect
I
them to
said,
grow.
well, I mean, it's a buyer's market, it's a seller's market in Toronto. So that was probably considered a feature, not a bug.
Oh, I'm sure there's a
I
clever
don't
real
know.
estate agent out there that was just saw this artist and was like,
Yeah,
this is
sure.
perfect.
Hey, I got to show you something in the basement. Yeah, so it's been fun. It's really wide variety of ideas and thoughts. Some serious, some not serious. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
been
that's
good.
good. The fungi thing I'm super interested in. I've been working for a podcast called Big Biology, which is a very good biology podcast, and we interviewed a Toby Kears is her name, and she's a researcher that's working on the fungal networks that develop between the plants and the fungi. And I think she's got a TED talk or something about it as well. But she was talking about how there's economics at play here, and there's lessons for human economic theory because these fungi can like basically allocate resources and withhold resources to plants. They actually like bargain for a better price, essentially, to different parts of the network. And she's done it in this elegant series of experiments that are just, I can't remember all the details, but it was really fascinating what they were able to do and show that. So there's somehow like a method of tallying up what you have, who needs what, who wants what am I going to get in return? Should I withhold it here and send it over here because I'll get more in return from this one, back. So there's this complex network of buying and selling of resources between plants and fungi. And her point, like her kind of big, hammer home line is like it's all taking place without what we would call consciousness, without the human consciousness. So what can humans learn from like taking the emotion out of it, I guess, or something like this? I don't know. It's
Yeah, that's really cool. What's her name again?
Toby Kears. I think she's based in Amsterdam, but I'll send you the details when we're done here because I think it's
Yeah,
something you'd
cool.
find fascinating. And she has the citizen science angle as well because they've started this thing called the SPUN network, and SPUN is an acronym, and I can't remember what for. But they're looking for people to sample soils because they're trying to conserve or they want to understand what the biodiversity of these things is out there because it's again the implications for climate change and stuff. What we're learning about how these things are sequestering carbon and all that kind of stuff is huge. So Yeah, it made me think of a surreal anthropomania story.
It definitely is. So there was a recent report from a guy in England arguing that they'd been recording electrical impulses in mycelia of
Yeah, I
fungi
saw this one.
and are convinced that they are they have a language and they'd identified 50 words.
For
I mean,
listeners that didn't see the
you
face, it was
know,
a pretty hard eye roll.
well, like honestly, please give me some rationale for why you're calling these
Yeah.
words. Anyway, our guest Rob Dunn had a really interesting take on this. The scientist involved doesn't want to do
Mm.
interviews. I have no comment on that. But Rob Dunn said, I obviously would need to see more evidence of this, but what it does do is signal that we just barely understand fungi.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, maybe there's signaling that we're not aware of and we're not sure what its meaning is. Maybe it isn't words, but it is a reminder that, that hubris that you referred to, we need to stamp that out and we need to back off a bit with our overwhelming tendency to label all life, not just wildlife, but plants, fungi, everything that shares the earth with us, with some sort of human attribute.
Hmm.
My favorite, I might have told you this story when we last talked, but it just summarizes it perfectly for me. True story. A farmer who had a hen house in England, fox broke in one night, killed 20 chickens, ate one, or took away one. And the farmer was convinced the fox did it out of spite. So I'm thinking, okay, so let's just dig deeper in this. What is going through the fox's mind? I hate that
Yeah.
fox. And you know what? I'm going to screw him up because I'm going to kill all his chickens. I can't give him the middle finger because I only have paws, but I can kill all his chickens and I'll eat one
Yeah.
too. Like, come on.
That's not giving the coyote enough credit too, right? Because then it's like this assumes that he, yeah, has this negative human attribute to waste the resources that he could go in and take one a day for 20 days. Again, we give him the human attribute of sort of this rationale and stuff like that. I don't know. Yeah,
He
I don't
doesn't he
like it.
doesn't need he doesn't need our human
Yeah, yeah.
attributes. He's got a life. There's plenty of evidence that foxes will do this even with wild birds. So they'll come across a nesting colony of terns, and this has been shown many times, and just go on a killing
Hmm.
spree and not eat, no come anywhere to eating all of them. But and it's not really understood why they do that, but it's not to spite the
Right. Yeah.
farmer.
I think wolves. There's
And
wolves will do it as well. They'll kill, I think, a number of the herd if they can, or something like that. I've heard that.
maybe there's a finely tuned killer urge that sometimes goes over the
Yeah.
edge a little bit. I don't know. Maybe they were planning to come
Yeah.
back. Maybe the fox was going to take a dead chicken every day. He doesn't know the farmer's going to clean them
Right.
up. I mean, come on. It's just
But I mean, I wonder then, just to, I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate here. I see.
you can try and do that
It's what I
if you
do.
want.
I
Okay.
can see a usefulness in some situations for communicating findings or, the science about animals in that way, like using metaphor, right? To explain science or so. Like what's going to get more people interested in fungi. Fungi might be speaking. I mean, we do it with whales too all the time too, right? But there's probably more of an argument for it's a language in whales and dolphins. But okay, now I'm hitting a wall with my devil's advocate, but I
Yeah.
could see an argument for metaphor and using it as a way of understanding and a way of teaching, because I just don't know that how you only can experience things
Well,
the way you experience them. So we're kind of trapped to always view things through a human lens. We can try as much as we can to remove ourselves, but when we speak to each other, we're going to use that vernacular, I guess. I don't know.
I have a couple of things to say. One, I hope the devil has better advocates than you.
Yeah.
Second, yeah, you're right. And communication, though, would be a good word
Right.
that would be more acceptable in the case of the fungi, for sure, I think. But it the this pervasive effort of humans to see all other wildlife in their own image is more destructive than helpful,
Mm-hmm.
generally. Like, for every example you could give me of where it's a good thing, like you see those all. There's always a video of an animal like an elephant that was rescued 20 years ago and is back in the forest and living
Mm-hmm.
wild. And then the person who nursed it back to health appears on the scene, and the elephant's delirious with
Right.
joy,
Yeah.
and excited and everything. Well, that's good, but you don't have to dress that up with fake language, right? You just say, yeah, they're smart animals. They remember this person. This person was good to them. If the person hadn't been good to them, the elephant would stamp all over them. Those are sort of natural things. It seems to me. It's not. I just don't think. I think you can do it if you want, but you got to be aware of what
Mm-hmm.
you're doing. And you got to be aware that when you call a weasel a vicious killer, what the hell does that mean? That means that it's a predator and it likes to kill as efficiently and quickly as
Mm-hmm.
possible. And so somehow it looks vicious. Like they're killing it to
Mm-hmm.
eat it. Are we vicious eaters? Like, do you ever go to a all you can eat rib place? Those are vicious
Yeah,
eaters.
no doubt. Yeah. But I guess, I mean,
Yeah.
it does highlight that there are similarities between us and animals. And I mean, that's another important thing then to remember is that we're not so far removed, right? They have memory, they have
Yeah.
social structures, they have needs that they
Yes.
acquire in different ways, just like us. So maybe that's another way then to, like, rather than thrust our complex human stories onto them. And I guess that's kind of it too, is that you're like, I'm upset about something, or this bothers me that this weasel is eating all these lovely birds that I care about. Therefore, he's the bad guy. He's vicious, and the birds are, the poor, innocent ones. But it's like we all have these same. We're not so different from these animals. So you can highlight
Yeah.
the similarities, but just get your own get your own baggage out of there, I guess.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I mean, you get coyotes kind of being seen on city streets, and I would say that half the citizenry would like to have them culled,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe two-thirds, three-quarters even. Why? Because they want to let their cat
Right.
out to kill a few songbirds, and like this is like triple
Yeah.
anthropomania. So we'll kill the coyotes so they don't kill my cat who's killing the birds. Why are the coyotes there? Well, it's because of us. They get food to eat. They are safe. We're on their territory, and I mean it just goes on
Mm-hmm.
and on. I mean I do try to be reasonable, and I have some of those same feelings, but there's a big difference between, oh wow, that tiger cub is so cute, and wow, that's an impressive animal,
Mm-hmm.
right? I just feel those are, one's kind of cute. I mean, are you serious? Sure, it's got big eyes and a high forehead. We respond to that because we're humans, and but to extrapolate that to puppies and kittens, sure, do it, but acknowledge at the time that it really has nothing to, like, they don't think they're cute.
I
You
don't know
do.
if we haven't deciphered dog language yet. Maybe that's what they're saying to each other.
No, that's true. But I can't. I've given up trying to decipher my dog's language because he speaks a
Yeah.
foreign tongue as far as I'm
So this
concerned.
is probably, we'll say, check out the episode on wildlife documentaries because this is looping back to that. I'm sure all of this comes up.
We did one. Yeah, we did one last year on
Mm-hmm.
plants, and there were a lot of things that stuck about that. One was one of our guests said, whenever I'm giving a lecture, I first thing I ask the students is, "Did you notice the plants outside the lecture hall?" And they never do. And he said that's because people treat them as
Yeah.
furniture,
Scenery. Yeah.
and yet they're, because we think they're inert. But he said they're more like very slow animals, and they're doing all this. They're doing amazing things, like a corn crop is being attacked by an insect that preys on. I think that's the right word, the corn plant. So the plant releases pheromones that attract parasitic
Mm-hmm.
wasps. Parasitic wasps lay their eggs in the caterpillars, There's a bit of a delay, of course, and so a few corn plants hit the dust, but it's pretty super amazing to
Mm-hmm.
me. Like you think of the evolutionary process, the sort of hit and miss, random mutation evolutionary process that actually ended up with that kind of system. That's pretty amazing. And they'll release other airborne chemicals to alert other plants what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. So our ignorance of plants, because of our attitude toward them, that they're not scary, they don't rush at us, they don't do this, they don't do that, so we ignore them. I mean, that's, we also had an episode this year on insects and the what some people are calling the insect
Mm-hmm.
apocalypse. The insect populations are dropping dramatically, and I bet you not one person in 10 realizes how, other than honeybees, realizes how important insects are to our way of life,
Mm-hmm.
not just fertilizing, pollinating flowers and honey, producing honey and so on, but everything. Insect eating birds in huge declines in eastern North America, at least. And, you know, it's a problem. And part of the problem is insects make us, some insects, many insects, make us feel
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable. Do you like finding cockroaches in your kitchen? No, you don't. Would you be fascinated by a praying mantis walking up your arm? Yeah, you would. You know they're not going to do
Mm-hmm.
anything to you. Really, the cockroach isn't either. But somehow cockroaches scuttle.
Well, and I think there's an association with uncleanliness and disease, and whether that's true or not, right? Like it's not the cockroach that's giving you the disease. I mean, you might be able to get disease from cockroach, some bacteria and stuff, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No, there's that. But then,
there is a visceral reaction
there's
to it,
lots.
though.
Yeah. And actually, the question we posed in this episode was, do you think that that's going to be a barrier to societies actually taking note of the fact that insects are dying at an alarming rate? And there have been kind of cool citizen science experiments, or although they were scientists doing them, where they would run a car up and down a measured stretch of highway, both directions, night and day, different weather, different seasons, and just count the number of insects that are splattered on the windshield. And it's dropped
Mm-hmm.
dramatically. I mean, North Americans know this because, distances are much greater than Europe. And so a road trip here could be 400K. Well, I mean, when you used to do a road trip of that distance, every time you stop for gas, you'd have to
Yeah.
clean the windshield. Yeah, you don't have to do that so
Yeah,
much anymore.
yeah, yeah. That was one of my favorite actually stories from from that episode. Is the idea of just using this car as a field sampling tool? But it makes perfect sense,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah,
It does make a lot
yeah.
of sense. And there was one question that I had written down too as we wind down here. That was about the insects, you know, and the insect apocalypse. Because, like you said, I don't think people realize how much we depend on them for all of these natural processes that happen, even just getting rid of decaying and dead things, you know, like imagine all the pileup that would be if there wasn't bugs to eat all that stuff. But then linking it to the de-extinction thing, it seems like insects would be kind of the prime candidates for, like, we could get those genomes and, if needed, quickly bump up populations in a pinch. Like, I'm not advocating for that. Like we said, this seems like the technology thing of like, don't worry about it and then we'll just technologically solve it. I realize that's what I'm saying, but you know, they breed super quickly. I think the genome would be less complex in terms of making
Yep.
hybrids with, you know, existing insects. Like, I think those species barriers might be a bit wobblier. That's a total speculation. I don't have the knowledge or data on that. But it just seemed like this would be one of those ways where, you know, just linking two two episodes that you've done, like this, maybe that's a use for some of this, you know, reproductive technology, even just for supplementing human protein, right? Rather than having 23 billion chickens, I mean, the idea of mass producing bugs for flour and different things, that's coming. That's something that's on the horizon as well.
Yeah, I think so. The second issue first about supplementing human diets. That's where the kind of
Mm-hmm.
insectophobia comes in because probably what you'll have to do is make it part of the protein content of something that doesn't look
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
doesn't resemble an
Don't
insect
tell
at
them.
all. In the first case, though, thinking about de-extinction, the issue with the insect apocalypse is the environmental overuse of pesticides. It's climate change, and the question will always become, as it would with any attempt to de-extinct any species, where are you going to
Hmm.
put them? Where are they going to live? Because nothing is the same as it was even what 25
Yeah.
years ago.
But as a tool to prevent extinction, I feel like we could do a lot to save bugs. And I mean, it's not a great
Yeah, it's
idea to
worth.
just like every year have to like remake all the bugs and put them back out there.
Well, I mean, who knows where we're heading? The really big question is, are we going to get deeper and deeper involved in bringing back from extinction, preventing extinction, repopulating
Hmm.
species of all kinds? I mean, where's the line between what's natural and what isn't
Hmm.
natural?
It's
I don't know. That's
it's already so
see, my dog even
yeah.
disagrees.
it's it's a very blurry line for sure. And I mean that's what's great about Anthropomania too, is that some of these, I'm listening to these episodes and some of these questions like this, what is this line? You come up, and yeah, it's a fascinating show, so I encourage everybody to listen to it. Do you know, I'll just end us with this, do you know the story of the screw worm?
No.
So there was it's one of the first examples I had heard of using insects to control or manipulating insects in a way to control a pest. So the screw worm was it was a type of bot fly that would decimate
Yeah.
herds of cattle and stuff in the American Southwest, I believe. And the screw worm only mates once a season. So once it's mated with one male, the female, it won't mate again. So what they did, and I think this was an initiative by the U.S. Army, and the government scientists and stuff like that, they blasted all of these, they would breed these male screwworms and blast them with radiation to basically make them infertile. And then in these giant cargo planes, just release these flies over the fields, just in massive, massive waves, just send them out there. They would breed with all the females, but because they were infertile, no eggs were produced, and then they basically solved the screwworm problem. And I'm pretty sure that to this day they still do release radiated males, not in the levels that they used to. But I always found that a fascinating story. As like I was interested in bot flies because I'm that kind of weird person, and then just I came across this story when I was doing my undergrad, and I was like, this is such a fascinating one of these Anthropomania stories, of
That actually
it
worked,
actually worked. I mean, I don't know.
right?
Maybe in another
Yeah.
50 years or something, we'll be like, oh shit, what did we do? We've actually created some kind of monster bot fly or something. I don't know, but it seems to have worked because I think that the program was started in the 50s or something like this.
Well, it's good to end on a note like that.
There we go. Okay, well, Jay, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for making Anthropomania 2
My
with your
pleasure.
co-host Nikki. It's a really great show, so I encourage people to listen and take a listen to the show notes to find out where to get it.
Thanks for having me, and we'll talk again in 2023.
Sounds great. See you then. Once again, many, many thanks to Jay for coming on, for being my most frequent guest, for always offering up some time to speak with me and to speak with you, my audience. Always a great time. Thank you, Jay. I hope you all enjoyed it. Look for Anthropomania wherever you get podcasts or in our show notes. It will be linked there. And then please, as always, head on over to the website, toobradforyou.wordpress.com. Get in touch with me, get in touch with the show, give us a follow wherever you're getting your podcasts. Give us a rating, give us a like, all of that good stuff really helps out. And until next time, take care, and we'll see you then. Bye for now.